Welcome to Lawyer on the Line.
Welcome to Lawyer on the Line. I'm your host, Roger Riedmiller.
And I'm Mark Scott.
We are Riedmiller Andersen and Scott, a law firm here in Wichita, Kansas. We handle personal injury, automobile accident claims, and our claim to fame is truck accidents that are also work comp claims, but we handle all kinds of work comp and personal injury accidents, especially involving truck accidents. This podcast will hopefully answer some of your questions about what you should or shouldn't do, what really matters, and what troubles people get themselves in when they are in this particular predicament from an accident, personal injury accident. Today we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, and that is what are the unique and different problems that come up when we're talking about medical care and the medical case of a truck automobile accident. How to get the best and most credible doctors and get the best medical care so that you will recover physically, mentally, emotionally, but also make the best recovery economically and be made as close as possible whole again after the accident. Supervision or direction of medical care. That's a hot topic, I think, nowadays.
Sure.
How is that treated differently from firm to firm?
Well, there are some firms that have rather captive doctors that they send their clients to for medical care. And I think they do that sometimes because they don't have to worry about pre-certification of a health insurance to get certain medical care. But it's not really an approach that I like, and we don't do in our firm, because we like to have our doctors be very independent of us. They're not doing anything under our direction. They're treating the client for the injuries that they have, which is what should be happening.
So what can you do as a injured individual involved in an accident with a truck, suffering serious injuries? What can you do to be assured that you're getting the best medical care possible and not being sent to somebody just to blow up the claim or make a better claim?
I think it all kind of starts with the seriousness of the injuries that often happen from a truck versus car crash. It's kind of obvious you're dealing with a vehicle that could weigh up to 80,000 pounds versus a car, which is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,200 to maybe 4,000, 5,000 pounds for a pickup truck. With that huge discrepancy, oftentimes the car loses and the occupants of that car lose. So there can be very complex injuries of numerous body parts. You get your initial care from the EMS that comes out to the scene,
Right.
Get to the hospital. That's all pretty standard. It's just the care that's available. They get you. But it's after you're being released that specialists usually come into play. If it's a spinal injury and you have surgery a day or two after the crash, well, that doctor's going to follow you for the remainder of that injury. But we find that oftentimes there's so many different injuries that you might have a neurosurgeon, you might have an orthopedic doctor for a fracture of a leg. There could be mental trauma, so PTSD often happens. So you may have somebody that's getting some psychological care. And so we've got all this interplay of different doctors. And if you don't have an attorney, sometimes it's very difficult to know who do I go to? Who's a specialist that I can rely on that's going to not only give me good care, but document the care that's given? Because I find that the medical records are king. Documentation of your injuries king. So
Well, is it also, it's not just that you want to get the best documentation and the best medical treatment, but you want to have a doctor who is um, willing, right?
Oh, most definitely. That's a problem we see often, and it's understandable. Doctors do not want to deal with attorneys in legal matters. They want to treat patients, and there's some doctors and unfortunately some practices that will not deal with attorneys at all. They won't talk to them. There's even some doctors that unfortunately, when they hear it's an injury claim, they won't even treat somebody. So there's got to be some assistance in getting to doctors that are going to be willing to treat you and support you if by chance it becomes a claim.
So it's kind of a happy middle ground. You want a doctor who's willing to take on the claim, but you don't want a doctor that's all they do
Sure.
is handle claims.
Right. Yeah, you get a doctor that's all they do is handle medical claims. The insurance companies know of them. The defense attorneys know who they are. And if their allegiance is more to the law firm rather than to the client's medical care, at least in my opinion, that can bring up some bias that can be used against you if your case has to go to trial.
Well, and then the next issue that I see that comes up most often in these cases is that a person is injured severely in an accident. They go to the hospital and they're in the hospital for a day or two, or let's say a week, and they have hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of medical bills.
Sure.
And you immediately think, wow, my case is worth a lot of money. Well, is it really if those bills are $100,000, but the insurance company writes off, or the doctor writes off, or somebody changes the medical bills because of a medical fee schedule or whatever?
Sure.
What's the difference between medical paid and medical billing in these types of cases?
Interesting question. So I've seen this before where we get in an emergency room record billing and trauma team was called. And so sometimes that trauma team, because that's a lot of people that respond. It's not just the doctor and one nurse. You got a whole team that's responding, ready to do x-rays, CTs. And that initial call for those doctors can easily be $25,000, $30,000 of a charge. So what happens is the insurance companies have agreements with the different medical providers that they say, we will agree to pay you X amount for that procedure, or 30% of a charge we're gonna pay for that. And they have this agreement, but that agreement isn't something that the injured party has. And if there's future medical expenses, you can't be guaranteed that you're going to get that kind of a discount.
Okay. Well, and there's also the infamous Martinez case.
Sure.
That insurance companies are constantly shoving down our throats.
Right.
What is the Martinez case?
So the Martinez case was a case where the question was, can the jury know the amount that was actually billed by the provider and what the write-offs are? Again, the agreements that the providers have with the various insurance companies. Can a jury be told about those write-offs? And we had a rule called the Collateral source rule that prevented the presenting that evidence to a jury, because it's not the injured party that came up with that discount. It was the insurance, and we're not supposed to be speaking about insurance during a trial. So the collateral source rule was designed to keep all that information out, and it was just left with what was billed by the medical providers. Well, that got challenged, and with the Martinez decision, the Supreme Court said that the full amount of the bill can be presented, but the write-offs can also be presented, and that can be very significant. I had a case where a young child was run over in a parking lot, and his medical bills were in the $200,000-$300,000 range. However, he was on a Kansas Medicaid, and they paid about 1% of that medical bill. And so, what's the big deal? Well, the defense wants to be able to just show his bills weren't $300,000, it was $30,000. This is what all they paid. And that matters because a jury sometimes will equate the extent of the medical expenses to the extent of the injury. And that's just
They'll
not
tie the value of the case to
right.
the medical
And
bills.
that's not a fair way to do that, in my opinion.
Another issue that often comes up, you kind of alluded to previously, was that with medical care, um, there's a requirement in these cases that we prove future medical care needs. What is the standard for those
Sure.
future medical care
So
needs?
the standard is that to claim a future medical expense, you need to have a foundation that is a to a reasonable degree of medical probability that future care is going to be needed. So that's the standard, reasonable medical probability. And you need somebody to be able to testify about that. And again, sometimes doctors are leery, they don't want to testify. And that kind of brings up why sometimes in these type of cases, we will do what's called an independent medical evaluation of our own client. And that'll be from a doctor that has a wide range of knowledge, but they can look at all the medical records that have been incurred in the medical bills and can speak with the doctors and figure out what the future holds. And that can be very, very important.
Well, doctors, I've been told that I'm a stubborn person, a stubborn lawyer sometimes, but I think doctors can be especially stubborn because they are scientists. I mean, that's the way they're trained,
Sure.
the Hippocratic Oath, the scientific method. And I don't know how many cases I've had where they've said, well, I can't say that within a scientific certainty, I would say that he or she doesn't need future medical care. And I'm scratching my head thinking, well, wait a minute, this person has a closed head injury. They're still on medication because they are perpetually having migraine headaches because of the severity of the concussion. Isn't that future medical care? And the doctor will say, well, in some cases, many cases, the headaches go away. I can't be certain, therefore I'm going to say no future medical care. That's one extreme I'm sure you've seen.
Sure.
But the other thing is, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but if there are certain damages to the spine, for example, that will often result in um, additional damage coming to play later on in a person's life. For example, when a person has a herniated disc, the doctor will often go in and clean out that herniation, maybe even fuse where that herniation was so that you have a stable joint in your spine.
Right.
However, fusion has a risk. And there's a percentage, and I've heard various quotes, somewhere between 5 and 15% chance that above and or below where they fused that part of your spine, you'll have there's a 5 to 15% chance you're going to have herniation because of the fusion.
Right.
You've seen that, right?
Yeah, definitely.
How do you deal with that?
Well, the defense will take the position 5 to 15% chance is not reasonably likely to happen. But what you need the doctor to be able to say is that to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, he has a 5 to 15% chance. That still is significant. And if you have that kind of a basis, then that evidence can come in. The defense will fight it, but there are decisions where just that 5 to 15% chance of something future, if the doctor is reasonably certain, can go to the jury.
Okay.
But it takes coordination with the doctor for them to understand that concept. And sometimes we use the independent medical examiner to do that. They're familiar with those legal standards that a doctor may not be used to. And again, the doctor wants to treat people. They don't want to be dealing with this. So we find that the doctors appreciate it in the complex cases when we do get a doctor involved. Sometimes it's a vocational specialist, can be numerous types of specialists, but we get somebody involved that can tie everything together.
Well, we've had cases where people have had injury to their leg combined with an injury to their spine and an injury to their head. closed head injury as well as an eye problem. In those cases where they have multiple body parts involved, we're talking about 4 or 5 different specialists.
Sure.
And the only way to bring it together is through the IME doctor, right?
Exactly.
And that they got to review all of the medical records, they review all of the bills, and then they bring the case together.
Right. And they're seeing things that the normal treating doctor would not see. The normal treating doctor, they're going to see likely the hospital records as they start dealing with the things, but they're not going to see all the medical records if there's an injury to the ankle. The spine doctor doesn't really care about that. He's not treating it. So getting that doctor that can look at everything, look at all those prior records and have really good knowledge about the pre-existing condition of the client. That's very, very helpful to the case and to your treating doctor, so they're not spending the time doing that for you.
And then you correct me if I'm wrong, but you can take the independent medical evaluator that you've hired,
right?
Take that report where they've reviewed all of the medical records, and you can hand it to the various specialists. They can review it and say, okay, thanks for doing that. And yeah, I agree with that.
Sure. And oftentimes we'll have not only an IME doctor, but then we'll have a life care planner.
You're beating me to the punch. That was the next one.
Can you explain to the audience what a life care planner does and why they can be of assistance?
Well, once we get to a point where we're trying to evaluate the case and we have all your medical bills and medical records, we have to put a cohesive picture together. Usually we put it in the demand letter, but in order to do that, you were talking about doing the IME.
Right.
But the IME only gets us the medical opinions as to what medical care was related and what future medical care may probably need to be done, and to some extent the cost of that. But what we need in order to tie the values to the medical records is a life care planner. And a life care planner involves a specialist in life care planning, but it usually involves someone with a degree in nursing.
True.
And also I think there's a certification that they will often get. And that life care planner will create a document basically saying, I've reviewed your IME doctor, I've reviewed all of your healthcare providers, and this is my analysis. I think that this person, based upon medical literature that I'm familiar with, is going to need this medication, this frequency, this physical therapy, and the adjacent disc level problem that I was talking about previously. The life care planner can spot that and give us an idea based upon their review of the medical records and everything as to what that will cost.
Yeah. But it even goes further than that. Those are the medical side, but you get somebody that's injured at the age of 30, catastrophic injury, there's going to be a lot more needs than just medical care. Home modifications can be very important. Sometimes you have to have vehicle modifications. So the life care planner, I presume, can help with that. Is that correct, Raj?
Right. They look at the bigger picture. I mean, we get the specialist to look at you. We ask them the right questions to look at your physiological problem and figure out what can be done and what's been done and what can be done. Then we get the IME doctor to look at all of the specialists. It's kind of like a reverse funnel. I don't know. Yeah, and it gets a little bit wider each specialist that we're talking about here. And the life care planner gives us probably one of the bigger pictures of what your case is about, what your loss is about, and how gives us the recipe for being able to make a more complete recovery to try to make you whole. Again, that's our goal in these cases, is to try to make the individual whole as possible. You can never replace the loss of days and time, but you can evaluate that and help with your future by trying to make the person whole with the right specialist. And after the life care planner, what do? Well, you also need a vocational, in some cases, a vocational expert. What's a good example of how you use a vocational expert
Sure.
in a case like this?
Well, trucking cases are just perfect examples. You get a back injury with a trucker, and that can have a huge impact on whether they're going to be able to get back to work. It's not just driving the truck. Truck drivers have to go and do a full inspection of the truck every day before they drive. Sometimes they're involved with loading, tarping, strapping down things. Just pulling the hood of the vehicle takes usually both arms and quite a lot of strength. And so the vocational rehab expert will look at the person's educational background, their work history, and sometimes with the catastrophic injury, they've got to figure out, well, what can this person do now that their life has been changed? Because they still want to work, they still have to take care of the family. What vocations can they consider? And so a vocational expert can tie that together. If you have a non-English speaking client, sometimes it's going to require going to school to learn English to be able to get into a job that they didn't necessarily need full English language capabilities. So a vocational expert can just be very important in a case with a catastrophic injury.
And of course, the selection, I'm going to make an assumption here, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but the selection of these different types of specialists, even including the treating specialist, begins at the very beginning of the case.
Yes. Yep.
And you begin thinking about, well, am I going to need a vocational expert with this person?
Right.
Am I going to need a life care plan? Some of it depends on how well you progress. Some people have great employers that re-employ them right away.
Definitely.
And they have a lot less loss of wages. And quite frankly, if you can get back to work, that's almost always best, because it's best for your mental well-being.
Most definitely.
To be a productive, active member of society. But a lot of people with these severe injuries from these truck accident cases, they have a difficult time getting back to that work environment. And we're talking about the specialists getting involved to help with that.
Definitely.
And help assess that. All right, we are just about out of time with this episode of Lawyer on the Line. If you have a question or want to talk about one of these types of cases, or want to talk about this particular area, you could always get a hold of us at www.lawyerontheline.com. That's our website, and you can ask a question, get more information as to how you can contact us. I think we have multiple ways that you can contact us there, but probably should start with the website, lawyerontheline.com. And remember, please, if you liked our podcast, if you felt like you got good information from our podcast, please review at our, I think it's, you go to our website to review, correct?
Yeah, well, you can do a Google review, but I think what the better thing to do, if you have questions, wherever you're seeing this podcast, leave us a comment. And those are things that we can discuss. Might be a topic that we can discuss in the future.
Give us a like, give us a good review, and we will see you next time on Lawyer in the Line. Thank you for watching.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.